What's the hardest thing about writing? Well, it's getting started. Maybe you're having a hard time coming up with a story idea, or you're stuck on where to take your story next. If you want a way into a story or a way through, I have 9 story starters to help you. This free PDF is full of story seeds and prompts to get you going. To download your 9 story starters, go to nancypanuccio.com/start. That's Nancy with an I, Panuccio with 2 C's, nancypanuccio.com/start. What makes a first-person narrator different from a more objective narrator is the first-person character has a stake in how the reader interprets the events. He or she has an invested interest in how we accept their reality, their version of what happened or is happening. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and writing coach. And each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's begin. First-person narration is one of the trickiest character perspectives to master. In many ways, it's more challenging than third-person narration. Third-person has its challenges too, but first-person comes with common missteps. So in this episode, we'll look at common ways writers go astray with first-person, and then I'll give you 3 ways to master your first-person story. First person feels more natural to many writers because we refer to ourselves as I in the way we talk to others and in our writing. For example, when we write in journals, we write in first person. So it should be simple to write a novel or memoir in first person, right? First person would seem like the most natural way to tell the story. And in memoir, it's really the only way to tell it. For fiction writers, first person feels less filtered and more intimate than third person. But first person comes with big challenges and limitations. First person tends to be self-indulgent, meaning we stay mainly in the character's head and we think as long as we're in their head, it's interesting. So the characters think about the story more than they actively engage in it. They observe, but they don't always get into the fray. And so first person is more prone to exposition, more summary than scene. Sometimes we'll get mini scenes where the character interacts and engages with other characters, but all the events and observations need to be consistent to what the character sees, knows, and believes to be true. And this can limit what can be told in interesting ways through contradiction or discrepancy between what the first-person narrator reports as true and what is or might be true. So here are 3 ways to think about your first-person central character. Number 1, the mask. We all have a mask, a persona we hold up to the world. This is the shield, the protective shield between our private world and our public world. And we're not always who we think we are. In other words, we're very self-deceiving. Your first-person narrator is going for an effect. They're trying to convince the reader that their version of reality, their version of the story events is correct, is true. What makes a first-person narrator interesting is when there's a discrepancy between their version of reality and what's actually real. So when writing in first person, it helps to assume a persona. You want to think about what the character is trying to hide from him or herself and the reader. What is this character trying to convince him or herself of? What are they trying to convince the reader? You can think of this as the character's shield of protection. We all have our own shields of protection. We're masters of self-denial. We distort reality. We self-protect. And that is what makes first-person narrators fascinating. So if you think of your first-person narrator as having a mask, the journey for the character is to shed the mask, to break through the pretense. For example, Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye is frightened of adulthood. He's confused by it. But to protect himself, he invents his own reality that adulthood is superficial and it's full of hypocrisy. And he thinks, by contrast, childhood is a world of innocence, curiosity, and honesty. And throughout the novel, Holden Caulfield seems to be excluded from and victimized by the world around him. He doesn't feel like he belongs. But to protect himself, he rejects that outside world. And as the novel progresses, we begin to understand that Holden's alienation is his way of protecting himself. He uses his isolation as proof that he's superior to everyone else around him. And by extension, he's above interacting with them. It's a mask he hides behind, this cynical sense of superiority. But it's really a form of self-protection. It's a mask. It's what your first-person character is hiding from the rest of the world and from himself. The character's transformation is in shedding the mask. Okay, on to number 2, unreliability. The reliability of any character should always be in question. If it's not, then we're just getting the facts, and there's no lingering question that tugs the reader through the story. So the reliability of any main character should always be questioned by the reader, but it's even more crucial when you're writing in first person. So reliability, what I mean by that is how much this character's version of events we can trust. Now, a first-person narrator is automatically considered less objective than a third-person narrator. Third person gives us the illusion of a more objective storyteller. They can move both outside and inside a character. But a first-person narrator is, by definition, not objective. We're experiencing the story through their perspective, what they see, hear, and believe. But what makes a first-person narrator different from a more objective narrator is the first-person character has a stake in how the reader interprets the events. He or she has an invested interest in how we accept their reality, their version of what happened or is happening. For example, in Suzanne Burney's novel, A Crime in the Neighborhood, in the opening scene, a young boy is found murdered behind the Spring Hill Mall in an ordinary suburban neighborhood. The first-person narrator, 10-year-old Marcia, is convinced that the new neighbor, Mr. Green, a shy bachelor who just moved next door, is the murderer. The reader then has to wonder if her suspicions are correct. We have no evidence that he's the murderer, but that's what gives the novel its tension. Here's an excerpt of dialogue between Marcia and her mother. Now, her mother has taken a liking to Mr. Green, and for context, her father has recently left her mother to be with her Aunt Ada. Here's the excerpt. But I know he did it, I said, kicking the coffee table with my good foot. You don't know, my mother said, folding her arms as she turned away and headed toward the staircase. You only think you do. I do know. You only want to know. That's all it is, Marcia, she said bitterly, turning back to me for a moment, her mouth a sharp line. And so to show unreliability, to make the reader wonder what's true and what's not, other characters will counter that perception. She's an unreliable first-person narrator. It's unintentional. She believes it, but we're not convinced. Now, she's telling this story retrospectively and is now coming to terms not only with the guilt of trying to convince everyone Mr. Green was the murderer, but she's coming to terms with the fear she was really feeling at that time, but too young to comprehend. And that this feeling of unsafety is something she still lives with as an adult. So a first-person narrator's character arc can move from unreliability to reliability. In Lolita, Humbert's unreliability is intentional. He's trying to convince us and himself that what he's doing is not bad, is not deplorable. He's trying to justify his own abhorrent actions. He's trying to convince us that Lolita seduced him. She's the seductress. She's complicit in what's happening. And so the onus isn't totally on him. And that's in sharp contrast to the extent to which he tries to hide the affair. Now, to his credit, he does finally come around to admitting to us, and more importantly, to himself, that what he did was deeply wrong and, more important, harmful beyond repair to Lolita. There's finally deep regret, remorse, and accountability. He's no longer deluding himself, and it's the only time we trust him. Now, if he didn't have that moment of remorse, that moment of awareness, the novel would just be a sordid tale. So that moment of truth is the only time he's reliable as a narrator. It's the only time we trust him. But whether the first-person character is intentionally or unintentionally unreliable, it adds tension and intrigue to the plot as the reader attempts to infer what is true and what isn't. We immediately don't trust Holden Caulfield's version of reality. He's young, he's pessimistic, he's belligerent, he distrusts adults, he feels victimized by the world, but that's what gives the story tension. Our hope is that he'll grow out of this so he isn't so lonely and isolated from the world around him. Okay, on to number 3, moral dissonance. In Lolita, we're captivated by Humbert Humbert's intellect and his wit. So we're simultaneously amused by his critique of American consumer culture and revolted by his obsession with 12-year-old Lolita, his obsession with what he calls nymphets. So we're simultaneously engaged and revolted. And so we're thrown in moral ambivalence. We're complicit simply because we can't stop reading, because Humbert is an engaging first-person narrator. He's unreliable. We know he's lying to himself and to us. We know his logic is skewed, that he's justifying something deeply immoral and criminal, but we can't look away. And so we're implicated. In A Crime in the Neighborhood, we're sympathetic to Marcia, and at the same time, we're worried about Mr. Green, who we know is just a shy bachelor. But we have to put these characters' version of events into context. We all see reality through our own filter, and it's skewed by our experiences, our worldviews, and beliefs, the context in which those beliefs are built. For example, Marcia lives in a suburban neighborhood where gossip is rampant. She lives in the pre-cell phone era when kids used to roam free from block to block. A young boy she knew has just been murdered. Her parents have recently split up, and she's broken her foot. So she spends the summer home alone with her notebook recording everyone's comings and goings. The boy's murder has obviously shaken her to her core. They haven't found the murderer. And so to assuage her fear, she decides that her new neighbor is the murderer. Everything else around her is out of control, and this is the only way she has some semblance of control. Of course, he's not the murderer. We never find out who it is, but her unreliability is unintentional. It's in context. Holden Caulfield is belligerent, pessimistic. He thinks he's superior to everyone else, but we still feel protective of him. And we're given the context. He's grappling with the death of his brother. So we hope he grows out of it. And he does, maybe not completely, but it's a start. And it gives us hope for him. Okay, so let's wrap this up. A first-person narrator has challenges and limitations. First person is more prone to exposition, more summary than scene, more of straight reporting of the events. So we're limited to what the character sees, knows, and believes to be true. To make first-person characters more intriguing and compelling, we need to play with contradictions and discrepancy between what the first-person narrator reports as true and what is or might be true. Number one, the mask. Think of this as the protective shield your character is wearing to hide from himself, to the world he inhabits, and to the reader. Number two, unreliability. He or she is trying to convince the reader of his or her version of events. It can be intentional or unintentional, but the real inner work of a first-person narrator is to shed the mask, to move from being unreliable to reliable. And number three, moral dissonance. The reader should feel ambivalence, not just one stock reaction, but conflicting feelings. We can feel captivated by a character and simultaneously detest the way they justify what they're doing. We can simultaneously dislike a character and feel sorry for them. We never want a stock reaction to a character. And first-person narrators, as the central character, need to have those contradictions. Sometimes first-person stories just report the events without discovering who the character is and how their version of the story came to be. Where writers tend to go wrong with first person is just lining up facts of experience. But writing is an act of discovery, even when you're writing memoir. There's a yielding, there's a listening, there's a receptivity. You, as the writer, is impersonating this first-person narrator. Character is revelation. Your first-person narrator isn't just an observer. They're not just reporting the events, they're giving their subjective version. Part of the thrill of reading a first-person character like Holden Caulfield, Humbert, or 10-year-old Marcia is uncovering the gaps in their logic and perceptions. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And if you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform and please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.